They say life is made up of a handful of moments, small, fleeting seconds when the whole world shifts beneath your feet and you don't even know it yet. You might be reaching for your hat, looking for a match, or stepping onto the wrong train platform. For me, it was a Thursday afternoon in 1957, the kind of day that smells like dust and rain and carries just enough wind to stir up your regrets. I was 24 then, with calloused hands and an aching heart that I didn't know needed healing. The war had ended years earlier, but the echoes of it still sat behind my ribs, quiet as a held breath. I worked down at a local print shop just outside of St. Louis, typesetting menus and wedding invitations, always in someone else's story. I had long since stopped believing I'd get one of my own. The sky that day was heavy and unsure, clouds moving like tired dancers over the city skyline. I had just finished delivering a box of hand-embossed pamphlets to a church on Magnolia Avenue, and as I stepped out, the first drop of rain kissed the brim of my hat. Funny thing about rain, it always knows when you've got nowhere to be. I turned down the street with no plan at all, tugging my coat a little tighter. That's when I saw her. She was standing in front of Miller's bookshop, just 2 stores down, peering into the window like the words inside were whispering secrets to her. She wore a yellow coat buttoned right up to her chin and a scarf tucked neatly around her neck. I remember thinking she looked like sunlight bottled up for safekeeping. And there it was, my moment. Now, I'd never been the sort to talk to strangers. Not out of shyness, mind you, but because I'd seen too much of the world to believe in chance. Or so I thought. But something in me, some foolish, fluttering thing, urged me forward, and before I knew it, I was standing beside her, watching her watch the books. "You a fan of Melville?" I asked, nodding toward the copy of Moby Dick in the window. She turned to me slowly, her eyes the color of storm-touched sea glass. "Not particularly," she said, smiling like she knew something I didn't. "But I like whales." That smile, Lord, I felt it settle into me like the warmth of brandy. And I remember thinking, if she walked away right then, I'd carry that smile with me the rest of my life. But she didn't walk away. She tilted her head, gave me another look, and said I was just killing time. Care to help me do it? And just like that, time stopped being something to kill. We walked, aimlessly at first, down side streets lined with sycamores just beginning to blush with autumn. Her name was Evelyn, though she insisted on being called Evie, said Evelyn sounded too much like a woman who collected porcelain cats and judged you for drinking coffee past noon. She had a way of making the world feel less heavy, like the weight of things eased just by being near her. "I'm a schoolteacher," she said, slipping her hands into the pockets of her coat. "3rd grade. They're at that age where they still believe in magic but have started asking where the sun goes at night." "That's a sacred in-between," I said, not thinking much of it until I saw her turn toward me, brows raised in surprise. She laughed then, soft and musical, like wind chimes swaying in some far-off place. "You always talk like that?" she asked. "Like what?" "Like the world's a poem." I didn't know how to answer that. Truth was, I hadn't spoken like that in years. Not since the war, not since I buried the version of myself that used to dream. But somehow with her, the words just came, like I was remembering a language I used to speak fluently, one made of wonder and slow glances. We ended up at a small diner on the edge of Forest Park. The kind with cracked vinyl booths and a waitress who called everyone Han. Evie ordered a cherry soda with extra ice, and I got black coffee, though I barely drank it. I was too busy watching her stir her straw in little circles, the ice clinking like glass bells. "Why books?" I asked. "You were staring at them like they held all the answers." "They don't," she said, "but they ask the right questions." I must have looked puzzled because she leaned in and added, "Books don't fix anything. But they remind you that someone else has felt what you feel. And sometimes that's enough." That hit me in a place I didn't know still had nerve endings. I'd spent years trying not to feel much of anything. And here she was, slicing me open with sentences and smiles. When the check came, I reached for it, but she stopped me with a hand on my wrist, warm, sure, unafraid. "Next time," she said. "Next time." She didn't answer. Just stood, grabbed her yellow coat, and walked to the door. But before she pushed it open, she looked back, one eyebrow arched just enough to be dangerous. "Well," she said, "are you coming or not?" And just like that, I was hers. She led me through the park like she'd known it since childhood, pointing out the duck pond and the statue of some forgotten general whose name neither of us bothered to remember. The leaves crunched underfoot, golden and tired, and somewhere in the distance a saxophone was playing soft, slow, like the city itself was sighing. "You always walk this much with strangers?" I asked, more curious than anything. Evie gave a little shrug. "Only the ones who ask about whales." That made me chuckle, and she smiled like she was proud of herself for pulling it out of me. We didn't talk about big things that day, not politics, not war, not the scars life had left on each of us. Instead, we traded little pieces of ourselves, the kind you only reveal when the stakes are still low but your heart is already leaning forward. She told me about her brother, James, who was overseas with the Navy and sent postcards from every port like he was collecting proof that the world was still out there. I told her about my father's barbershop where I learned how to listen more than I talked and how my mother used to hum lullabies in the kitchen even when the oven was broken and the soup was thin. "Do you live nearby?" she asked at one point, and I hesitated, not because I didn't want her to know, but because it felt too soon to admit how small my life had become. "A room above the shop," I said. "It's quiet." "That sounds lonely." Sometimes, I admitted. She didn't pity me. That's something I loved about her, even then. She never tried to fill the silence with noise. She just walked beside me like it was enough to share the stillness. As the sun began to fall behind the trees, painting the world in honey and rust, we found ourselves on a bench by the water. Evie sat, tucking one leg beneath her, and looked out over the pond where the ducks were settling in for the evening. "You ever think about what your life would have looked like if one thing had gone differently?" she asked, almost like she wasn't sure she wanted an answer. "All the time," I said. "But then again, if I hadn't walked down Magnolia today." She turned toward me then, her expression unreadable, her eyes lit by the last stretch of day. "You believe in fate?" she asked. I wanted to say no. I wanted to keep pretending that life was nothing more than luck and timing and accidents. But sitting there next to a woman who felt more familiar than any place I'd ever been, I couldn't bring myself to lie. "I might be starting to," I said. She smiled, leaned back, and said, "Good. Because I think we're supposed to see each other again." And I swear to you, in that moment, I felt the world tilt just slightly, like everything had been waiting for this to happen. She told me to meet her at the Botanical Gardens the following Saturday at noon, sharp. I remember checking my watch 3 times before I even left the house, tied my best tie twice, and shined my shoes till they caught the light like little mirrors. She didn't show up at noon. Didn't show up at 12:30 either. By 1 o'clock, I'd paced the east side of the gardens so many times that the old man selling peanuts tipped his cap and asked if I'd lost my dog. I waited until 2, then walked home slow, trying to convince myself it was nothing. Maybe she'd forgotten. Maybe something came up. Maybe she changed her mind. The truth hit me on the corner of Del Mar and Euclid hard, right in the chest. I didn't even know her last name. I didn't know where she lived. I didn't have a way to find her. And I hated that I cared so much after just one day. I threw myself into work that next week, printing labels, menus, wedding cards, even a batch of obituaries. It was mechanical, steady, a rhythm that didn't leave much room for wondering. But every time I passed the bookshop on Magnolia, I slowed down just a little. Wednesday came. Rain again. Just like the first day. I'd stopped carrying an umbrella by then. What was the point? But as I turned the corner past Miller's bookshop, there she was. Same yellow coat, damp at the shoulders. Same scarf, now a little crooked. She looked surprised to see me, and not the good kind. "Evie," I said too quickly. "Jack," she answered, her voice small. I didn't think you'd still." I didn't ask her why she didn't show. I just said, "You all right?" She nodded, looked down at her hands. "My brother's ship got caught in a storm. Word came Tuesday morning. I didn't know where I was all weekend. Just walking. Didn't think to send a note." "I'm sorry." She looked up then, and I saw it in her face, grief, fresh and untamed. It wasn't the kind that needed words. It needed something quieter. "Come on," I said, offering her my arm. "There's a diner a few blocks down. Same cherry soda, extra ice?" She nodded. Didn't smile this time, but I didn't need her to. We walked in silence most of the way. When we sat, I didn't ask about her brother. She didn't talk much. But when the waitress brought the drinks, she reached out and held my hand across the table. And that's when I knew. She hadn't run. She hadn't forgotten. She was just carrying something heavy. And somehow I'd become the place she could set it down. After that second diner meeting, we fell into a kind of rhythm. Not quite courting, not quite strangers. She'd meet me every Saturday, sometimes at the gardens, sometimes at the park bench, once at a museum where we got scolded for standing too close to a sculpture we were both pretending to understand. But I noticed something early on. Evie never let things get too personal. She'd ask about my favorite movies, but never told me hers. She'd laugh at my stories from the war, those I could tell without flinching, but when I asked about her father, she'd brush it off, say he lived out west, and change the subject. I chalked it up to grief, to whatever weight her brother's absence left on her. Still, I couldn't help but feel like I was holding a thread with no idea where it led. One afternoon in early November, we were walking through Tower Grove Park. The leaves had mostly fallen, and the wind cut sharper than it had the week before. She wore a red wool hat pulled low, her hands stuffed in her coat pockets. We passed an old man playing chess with himself on one of the stone tables. "Do you ever lie?" she asked, sudden, sharp as the air. I stopped walking. "That a trick question?" She turned to me, her face unreadable. "No. Just wondering. If you've ever told someone something because it was easier than the truth." I thought about it too long, probably. "Sure," I finally said. "During the war, I wrote my mother letters and told her the food was good. That we played cards every night and had dry socks. Figured it was better than her knowing I spent half my time scared stiff and the other half freezing." Evie didn't smile. "I lied once," she said. "And it's still following me." Before I could ask what she meant, she reached up, touched my cheek with her glove, and said, "You're kind, Jack. Maybe too kind." Then she kissed me. Right there in the middle of the park. Quick, quiet, and with a kind of sorrow in it I didn't understand. That night, I couldn't sleep. The kiss stayed with me, but so did her words. What lie? And why did she look like she was saying goodbye when she hadn't even left? The next morning, I passed by Miller's bookshop, hoping to catch her. But the display window was empty. Moby Dick was gone. So was the sign. The shop was closed. Windows dark. A small paper tacked to the door said simply, "Closed until further notice. Personal matters." No number. No forwarding address. And just like that, she was gone. I must have gone by that bookstore 3-4 times a day the week after it closed. Couldn't help myself. I'd pause, look in, hoping maybe the sign would be gone, or maybe she'd be inside, straightening books, her yellow coat hanging from the hook behind the counter. But it stayed dark. Silent. Evie was gone. Just like that. I didn't even know if Evie was her real name. I tried the diner next, asked the waitress who always brought her cherry sodas if she knew where Evie lived, what her last name was, anything. She gave me a slow shake of her head. That sweet girl? Always left a good tip. But quiet, you know? Never gave much away. It gnawed at me. I'd known her just long enough to feel the shape she left behind and not long enough to trace her steps. I went to the school board office, told them I was delivering flyers, and casually dropped her name. They said there was no Evelyn or Evie on record teaching 3rd grade at any of the schools nearby. Now that rattled me. I sat with that for hours, trying to decide whether I was chasing a ghost or just a woman with more to her than she let on. The more I thought about it, the more little pieces didn't quite fit. The brother in the Navy, was he real? The family out west? The so-called lie that still followed her? And yet I knew what I felt was real. That hand across the table. That kiss in the park. Late one night, I got desperate enough to go back to Tower Grove Park just to feel close to her. It was well past midnight. Cold. The kind of cold that makes your teeth ache. But I found that same bench we'd sat on. Leaves had piled up around it, undisturbed. And tucked between 2 slats in the wood, almost missed it, was a folded scrap of yellow paper. My heart punched straight into my throat. I unfolded it with shaking hands. "Jack, if you're still looking for me, don't..." "Not yet. There are things you don't know. Things I need to fix before I can be found. Don't stop living. Just wait a little while longer. Please. E. No address. No date. Just that." I sat there until the sun came up. And I waited. 2 months passed. The days blurred into each other, work, coffee, sleep. No more long walks through the park. No more bookstores or Saturday hopes. I stopped shaving every day, let my shirts stay wrinkled. Most people didn't notice, but Charlie, my boss at the print shop, did. "Everything all right, Jack?" he asked one Friday as I finished trimming a batch of wedding invitations for a couple I'd never meet. "Sure," I said, lying smooth. "Just the cold weather." But it wasn't the cold. It was the hollow. That quiet ache that comes from not knowing how to let go of someone you never had a full hold of in the first place. Then, right when I'd begun convincing myself that maybe I'd imagined the whole thing, that maybe Evie was some beautiful mirage conjured by loneliness, something strange happened. It was a Tuesday. Bitterly cold, the kind that made metal sting and the wind whistle through your collar. I just closed up the shop when a boy, no older than 10, came up to me on the corner of Park and Jefferson. He had a freckled face, a wool cap too big for his head, and a brown satchel over one shoulder. "You Jack?" he asked, his breath turning to fog in the air. "Yeah," I said slowly, unsure. "Who's asking?" "Lady gave me this. Said to wait till I saw you." He dug into his satchel and handed me a letter. Yellow envelope. No stamp. Just my name in Evie's handwriting. Before I could say a word, the boy turned and ran. I stood there on the sidewalk like the earth had stopped spinning. Back home, I lit the lamp and opened the envelope with fingers that trembled like leaves. Inside was a letter, 3 pages, written in neat, careful script. "I'll spare you the full contents, but I'll never forget the first line. There's something I haven't told you and I think it's time. She wrote of a family secret. A scandal, really. Her father had been involved in a fraud scheme out in California, fled with debts, and left behind a trail of angry men and court summons. When it all blew up, Evie and her mother changed their names and moved to St. Louis to start fresh. But the past has a way of catching up. That weekend she missed our meeting? It wasn't just her brother. She'd gotten word that someone from her father's old life had found her. A private investigator. Threatened to expose them unless she disappeared. So she vanished quietly like smoke. I didn't know who to trust, she wrote. But you. I wanted to. More than I can say. She ended with one line, scribbled like she'd written it quickly. If you're still willing, meet me where the lilies bloom. Saturday. Noon. That was Forest Park. The lily ponds. I didn't hesitate. Saturday came like it had been waiting for us. I arrived at Forest Park 20 minutes early, though I'd never admit it to her. The air had that brittle edge to it, cold enough to crack your lips but not enough to bite your bones. I brought a thermos of coffee, 2 cups, and wore my gray wool coat with the stitched elbow patch Evie once poked fun at. Makes you look like a professor who forgot his glasses, she'd said. That had stuck with me. The lily pond wasn't much to look at this time of year. Water was half frozen, lilies long gone, just a brittle crust of ice glinting under a pale sun. I took a seat on the same bench we'd shared back in October. Back when things felt like a beginning, not an echo. And then I heard her footsteps. She came around the path from the east side, yellow coat, same as always, but with a dark green knit cap tugged low over her ears. Her scarf was plaid this time, tucked neatly into the collar, and her gloves were the kind women wore when they wanted to look polished but not rich wool, not leather. She stopped a few paces away and gave a small smile. I didn't think you'd really come. I stood. I wasn't sure you'd ask. We looked at each other a moment, quiet. She stepped forward first, her boots crunching the frost. I poured her a cup of coffee and handed it over, black, just like she used to take it even when she grimaced at the bitterness. She didn't sit right away. Just looked out at the pond. I almost ran again, she said softly. I sipped from my cup. What stopped you? Evie glanced down. You did. That letter I left, I didn't expect you to find it. I left it because I had to say something. I didn't expect hope. She finally sat and I joined her. I've been lying to people most of my life, she said. Not about everything. But enough. And I think I'm tired. Then let's stop, I said. No more lies. Not with me. Her shoulders dropped a little, like a weight slid off. She looked at me, not around me, not past me, but right into me. There's a man from California. Hired to track my father. He found us last summer. I didn't want to drag you into that. I thought I had to vanish. You don't have to vanish, I said. You can just be here. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a folded sheet of paper, crinkled, creased at the corners. It was a rental lease. 2279 Laclede Avenue. A shop space. I signed it this morning, she said. It's going to be a bookstore again. But this time mine. I figured if I'm starting over, I want it to be on my terms. What do you call it? I asked. She hesitated, then said, Chapter 2. It landed in my chest like a bell ringing low and steady. You need help painting shelves? I asked. She smiled wider this time. I need help with everything. We sat a while longer, watching the light fade. She didn't run. I didn't let go. The first time I turned the key to 2279 Laclede Avenue, the lock stuck. I gave it a little jiggle, just like Evie told me, and the door creaked open with a sound like an old man groaning out of bed. The shop had been empty for months. Dust floated in the air like old memories, and the floorboards gave under our feet in soft groans and sighs. We stood in the doorway that morning, her arm tucked into mine, looking at the place we were about to rebuild. It smells like damp paper and regret, I muttered. Evie laughed. Perfect for a bookstore. We spent the next 2 months scrubbing shelves, sanding windowsills, repainting the walls. She chose a soft green for the front room, said it reminded her of libraries she loved as a girl. I hauled lumber and cursed at hammer slips while she cataloged used books by hand, scribbling notes in a blue ledger. Every day started the same. She brought coffee, always too sweet, and a bakery roll wrapped in wax paper. I brought my toolbox and a quiet prayer that the ceiling wouldn't collapse before we got the second coat of paint on. It was hard work. Real work. Not the kind that makes you sweat just in the body, but the kind that presses into your soul. And every night, we'd sit cross-legged on the shop floor, sore and speckled with paint, splitting whatever takeout we could afford. And she started opening up. Told me about her childhood in Fresno, about her mother's long illness and the last good summer she remembered, age 10, reading, and of Green Gables under a backyard elm while her father built a fence that never got finished. I told her more about the war. Not the blood. Not the headlines. But the quiet things like the night a French farmer fed me from his own winter rations or the boy from Ohio who recited poetry before bed like it was armor. One night, as we closed up shop and locked the door behind us, she took my hand. "I never thought I'd find home in a place again," she said. "Then I met you." We didn't say much after that. Just walked slowly, hands laced, toward wherever the street ended and something else began. By spring, the sign was ready. Gold letters on deep navy blue. I climbed the ladder and hung it myself. Chapter 2 Booksellers. EST 1958. Opening day, a line formed before the bell above the door ever rang. Neighbors, teachers, even a man with a saxophone case who'd played for change near the park. Word had gotten around. Evie stood behind the counter in a dress the color of tulips and a look that said she'd lived 1,000 lives just to arrive here. As we welcomed the first customer, she leaned in and whispered, "So this is how a second life begins." We were married in October under a maple tree just beginning to burn red at the tips. No aisle, no altar, just a circle of friends and a minister who used to buy books on theology from our shop and always smelled faintly of pipe tobacco. Evie wore a cream-colored skirt and a lace blouse, and she tucked a dogwood flower behind her ear instead of a veil. I don't remember much of the ceremony, only how her hands didn't shake when she held mine and how the world seemed to narrow down to just her face, her eyes, that soft look that said, "This is it now. This is the beginning." Life didn't get easier after that, but it got richer. We lived in the apartment above Chapter 2, our little nest of wood floors, crooked shelves, and mismatched mugs. Every morning, Evie would go down first, open the windows, light the candle on the front desk, and put on a record, jazz, usually. Something soft and playful to welcome the day. By the time I joined her, coffee would already be brewing and she'd be arranging the staff picks shelf with a kind of reverence, like every novel had a soul. Customers became neighbors. Neighbors became friends. There was a man named Harold who brought fresh scones every Sunday and a quiet widow named Lorraine who came every Thursday to reread Little Women in the same corner chair. And as time wore on, the shop bore the marks of living. Scratches on the counters, fingerprints on the glass, paint worn thin by decades of sunlight. We never minded. We welcomed the wear. It meant we'd stayed. It meant the place was loved. Evie and I grew older together, not all at once, but slowly, like soft rain swelling into a river. Her laughter deepened, her silences grew warmer. We weathered it all, a leaking roof, a fire scare, even a rough season when the rent nearly outpaced our earnings. But we held fast. We never had children. Not by choice, not by sorrow. Just how it turned out. And still, we were surrounded by generations of young readers who called her Miss Evie and brought her pressed flowers in spring. In the winter of '83, she caught a cough that wouldn't leave. It lingered week after week. By March, she'd stopped coming down to the shop. I read to her every night by the window, the same spot where she once dreamed up the bookstore's name. And one morning, quiet as paper turning, she was gone. I kept the shop open. Still do. Every day, I open the door, sweep the threshold, turn the sign, and light the candle she always lit. Some nights, I sit in her chair by the window and I swear I feel the brush of her hand on mine. Not a memory. Something else. And I know we're still in Chapter 2. Together. Always.